The Kithara collective had ruled the outer rim for 3,000 cycles. Their crystalline ships carved through space like shards of deadly beauty, leaving behind only silence and the faint shimmer of quantum distortion. When they encountered new species, the pattern was always the same: assess, categorize, and either absorb into their collective consciousness or eliminate entirely. No exceptions had ever been made. Commander Zephi floated in the neural interface chamber of the flagship Eternal Resonance, his consciousness merged with 17 other tactical minds. Through their shared awareness, he felt the electric anticipation that rippled through the fleet. Today, they would finally breach the mysterious barrier that had protected the human territories for the past 2 centuries. The humans were an anomaly that had plagued collective strategists since first contact. Unlike other species that either surrendered immediately or fought with predictable desperation, humans had simply disappeared. One day they were expanding across dozens of star systems, establishing trade routes and diplomatic relations with neighboring species. The next day, every human colony, every ship, every trace of their civilization had vanished behind an impenetrable energy barrier that stretched across 50 light-years of space. Analysis confirms barrier degradation at 17%, reported Navigator Velvats, her mental voice cutting through the collective consciousness like a blade. The quantum fluctuations we've been inducing for the past cycle are finally showing results. Zephi felt a surge of satisfaction from his bonded partners. The collective had invested enormous resources in developing the resonance disruptors specifically to crack human defenses. It had taken their finest scientists decades to understand even the basic principles behind the barrier technology, and decades more to devise a method of attack. "All vessels report ready status," came the unified thought voice of the fleet. 143 ships of various classes, from nimble scout vessels to the massive dreadnought carriers, hung in perfect formation just outside the barrier's edge. Each ship hummed with barely contained energy, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight into rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Begin final approach," Zephi commanded, and felt his order ripple through the collective mind like a stone dropped in still water. The barrier shimmered before them, a wall of coruscating energy that seemed to bend space itself. For 200 years, it had been absolute, turning aside every probe, every weapon, every attempt at communication. Collective scientists had theorized that it was some form of evolved shield technology, possibly drawing power from an entire star system to maintain its integrity. As the resonance disruptors reached full power, hairline cracks began to appear in the barrier's surface. Zephi felt a moment of doubt flicker through the collective consciousness. What if the humans had evolved during their isolation? What if they had developed weapons beyond current understanding? The doubt was quickly suppressed, pushed down beneath layers of strategic confidence and numerical superiority. The first crack widened, reality seeming to fray at its edges like torn fabric. Through the gap, long-range sensors detected emptiness. No immediate military response, no sudden surge of defensive energy. Just the cold vacuum of space and the distant gleam of stars. "Breach achieved," Velvats reported, her mental voice tight with concentration. "Opening stabilizing to approximately 50 kilometers width. Gravitational distortions minimal. No immediate threats detected." Zephi felt the collective mind shift into combat configuration, individual consciousness merging into perfect tactical unity. "All ships, advance through breach. Maintain formation Delta 7. Scouts proceed to maximum sensor range." The Eternal Resonance was among the first vessels through the opening, its sensors sweeping space for any sign of human presence. What they found was puzzling. The star systems beyond the barrier showed signs of recent habitation, but no current activity. Orbital platforms hung dark and silent around several worlds, their surfaces scarred by what appeared to be deliberate demolition. "Commander," came an urgent mental pulse from Scout Leader Kethvar aboard the fast reconnaissance ship piercing sight. "I'm detecting massive artificial structures in the Kepler 442 system. Distance, 4 light-years. The constructions appear to be geometric in nature. Highly regular patterns, but unlike any architecture in our databases." Zephi felt curiosity spike through the collective consciousness. "Elaborate." "The structures appear to be cubes, Commander. thousands of them, each approximately 1 kilometer on a side. They're arranged in perfect grid patterns around the system's primary star. No energy emissions detected, but there's something else. The star itself shows signs of modification. A chill ran through the collective mind. Species capable of stellar engineering were rare and, typically, extremely dangerous. What kind of modification? Unknown. The stellar output has been altered, focused into specific wavelengths. Almost like the entire star has been converted into some kind of transmission device. HFY made the decision quickly. All vessels, alter course for Kepler 442. Battle Formation Alpha. Prepare all weapons systems for immediate activation. The journey took 3 standard days, during which long-range scans revealed increasingly disturbing details about the human modifications. The cubic structures weren't randomly distributed around the star. They formed precise geometric patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond current collective understanding. More troubling, several of the cubes showed signs of recent construction, their surfaces still gleaming with the distinctive molecular bonding patterns of active fabrication. Energy spike detected. Velvatz's mental voice cut through the collective like an alarm. The cubic structures are activating. Through the shared consciousness, HFY felt the crew's combined shock as thousands of the geometric constructs suddenly blazed to life. Each cube began to emit a specific frequency of electromagnetic radiation, the wavelengths perfectly tuned to create constructive interference patterns. The effect was like watching a three-dimensional orchestra of light and energy begin to play a song written in physics itself. Defensive formations. HFY commanded, but even as the order propagated through the fleet, he felt a strange sensation beginning to affect the collective consciousness. The harmonic frequencies being generated by the cubic array weren't just energy emissions. They were having a direct effect on the crystalline matrix that formed the basis of collective technology and biology. Individual thoughts began to separate from the group mind. For the first time in his adult life, HFY found himself alone inside his own consciousness, cut off from the comforting presence of his bonded partners. Around him, he could feel similar panic beginning to grip the other crew members as their neural links failed one by one. "What is happening?" someone screamed aloud, the sound strange and foreign after so long communicating through mental connection. Before anyone could answer, space around them began to change. The familiar black of the void shimmered and rippled like water, and, suddenly, they were no longer alone. Ships began to materialize around the collective fleet, but these weren't vessels in any conventional sense. They appeared to be grown rather than built, their organic curves and flowing lines suggesting a technology that merged biology with engineering in ways that defied categorization. The human ships moved with impossible grace, flowing through space like living creatures swimming through an ocean. They took positions around the collective fleet with the efficiency of a pack of hunters surrounding prey, but made no aggressive moves. Instead, a communication signal reached the eternal resonance, transmitted on standard galactic frequencies. "Welcome to human space," came a voice that somehow managed to convey both warmth and subtle menace. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Collective Defense Force. You have entered our territory without permission, damaged our protective barriers, and brought weapons into our home. Normally, this would result in immediate termination of all hostile forces." HFY struggled to respond without the collective mind to support him. Speaking aloud felt clumsy and inefficient, but it was the only option remaining. "This is Commander HFY of the Kithara Collective. We claim this space by right of conquest. Surrender immediately, or face the consequences." The human's laughter was like nothing he had ever heard before, rich and complex and somehow containing multiple layers of meaning. "Commander, you misunderstand the situation. You aren't here to conquer us. You're here to learn why none of your kind have ever returned from human space. Consider this an educational opportunity." As if responding to some unseen signal, the cubic structures around the star began to shift their harmonic output. The effect on the collective fleet was immediate and terrifying. Their crystalline hulls, designed to be nearly indestructible, began to resonate with the new frequencies. Not destructively, but in a way that seemed to make the ships themselves more responsive, more alive. You see, Captain Shen's voice continued, humans have a different relationship with technology than most species. We don't just build tools or grow symbiotic partners. We invite our technology to become part of us, and we become part of it. The barrier you broke through wasn't just a defensive system. It was a transformation field. HFY felt a strange sensation beginning in his extremities, a tingling that seemed to spread inward toward his core. Around him, other crew members were experiencing similar effects, their crystalline carapaces beginning to shift color and texture in ways that should have been impossible. The process isn't painful, Chen explained, her tone almost conversational. Previous visitors from your collective described it as liberating, actually. You see, your neural linking technology is remarkably similar to what humans developed for our own consciousness expansion projects. The main difference is that yours maintains rigid hierarchical structures, while ours emphasizes individual growth within collective harmony. The changes were accelerating now. HFY could feel his awareness expanding beyond the confines of his individual consciousness, but not in the familiar way of the collective's forced mental bonding. This was different, gentler, like stepping from a small room into a vast cathedral. He was still himself, still individually aware, but he could also sense the thoughts and emotions of every being within a vast radius. "What are you doing to us?" he managed to ask, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult as his throat and vocal apparatus began to transform. "We're offering you a choice," Chen replied. "Your people have spent millennia building a civilization based on forced unity, where individual identity is subsumed into the collective consciousness. It works, after a fashion, but it limits growth and creativity. Humans discovered something different during our isolation period. We learned to maintain our individuality while sharing our consciousness voluntarily." Through his expanding awareness, HFY could sense the truth of her words. The human ships around them weren't crewed by separate individuals following orders. They were inhabited by conscious beings who chose to work together, their combined creativity and problem-solving ability far exceeding what any rigid hierarchy could achieve. "The previous collective fleets that entered our space were given the same choice you're being offered now," Chen explained. "Join our community as equals, contributing your unique perspectives and abilities to our collective growth, or maintain your isolation and return to your territory with complete memory suppression of what you've experienced here." And none chose to return, HFY realized, the implications becoming clear as his consciousness continued to expand and merge with the vast network of minds that comprised human space. He could feel the presence of former collective members who had made the transition years or decades ago, their thoughts still recognizably their own but enriched by connection to the greater community. "None chose to return," Chen confirmed. "When you experience true voluntary collective consciousness, when you feel what it's like to be part of something greater while still maintaining your individual identity, the old forced unity seems pale and restrictive by comparison." As the transformation reached its final stages, HFY felt the last barriers between himself and the human consciousness network dissolving. But, instead of losing himself in the merger, he felt more completely himself than ever before. His memories, his experiences, his unique perspective as a former collective commander all remained intact, but now he could share them freely with beings who could understand and appreciate them without trying to subsume them. The panic and fear that had gripped him at the beginning of the transformation were fading, replaced by a sense of wonder at the vast community he was now part of. Through the network, he could access the experiences of thousands of former enemies who had made similar transitions, each bringing their own knowledge and abilities to enrich the whole. "The choice is still yours," Chen's voice reached him, though now it came through the consciousness network rather than the ship's communication system. "We don't force anyone to stay. Some individuals have chosen to return to their original communities, though they must accept memory suppression to prevent contamination of their species' development." But HFY was already exploring the vast possibilities that his new situation offered. Through the network, he could feel the ongoing projects that the human community was engaged in, stellar engineering on a scale that dwarfed anything the collective had ever imagined, consciousness research that promised to unlock new forms of intelligence, exploration of parallel dimensions that might harbor entirely new forms of life. "I understand now," he transmitted through the network, his thoughts reaching every member of the community simultaneously. "This is why none returned. Not because they were destroyed or captured, but because they discovered something better than what they had left behind. The response from the community was like a warm embrace of welcome and understanding. Thousands of individuals shared their own transition experiences, offering support and guidance while respecting his unique journey. The sense of belonging was unlike anything he had experienced in the rigid hierarchy of the collective. As the human fleet began to move away from the breached barrier, Sci-Fi found himself looking forward to exploring his new existence. The collective would eventually send another expedition to investigate the disappearance of his fleet, and, when they arrived, they would face the same choice he had been offered. Some would choose to return with their memories suppressed, carrying back only vague reports of impenetrable human defenses. Others would choose to join the community, adding their perspectives and abilities to the ever-growing tapestry of consciousness that was human space. But none would return unchanged. The transformation field that surrounded human space ensured that every visitor was offered the opportunity to experience true voluntary collective consciousness, to understand what they were missing in their original communities. The barrier behind them began to repair itself, the quantum frequencies generated by the cubic arrays weaving spacetime back into its protective configuration. Soon, human space would once again be sealed off from the outside universe, giving the community time to integrate its new members and continue its vast projects in peace. Sci-Fi settled into his new existence with a sense of profound gratitude. He had come as a conqueror but had instead been conquered by something far more powerful than weapons or technology, the simple idea that beings could choose to work together while maintaining their individual freedom and identity. 3 months had passed since the Kythera collective fleet had vanished into human space, and the Central Command was growing increasingly concerned. Admiral Thexbar stood before the Council of Resonance, her crystalline form reflecting the harsh light of the command chamber as she delivered her report to the assembled collective consciousness. The probe signals ceased exactly 97 days ago, she explained, her mental voice carrying overtones of frustration and worry. Long-range sensors show no debris, no signs of battle, no distress signals. The Eternal Resonance and its entire fleet have simply disappeared. Through the collective mind, she felt the ripple of unease that passed through the council members. The Kythera had never lost an entire fleet without explanation. Their military doctrine had been refined over millennia of conquest, their technology tested against hundreds of species across the galaxy. The idea that humans, a relatively young species with limited territorial holdings, could somehow eliminate a full collective battle group was almost incomprehensible. "What is the status of the barrier breach?" inquired Counselor Nexthal, his mental presence cold and analytical. "Sealed," Thexbar responded. "Our long-range observations show the energy wall has completely regenerated. Whatever method Commander Sci-Fi used to create the opening, the humans have countered it." The collective consciousness fell silent for several moments, processing this information. Finally, Supreme Counselor Velmaxis projected his thoughts to the assembly. "The implications are clear. Either the humans have developed military capabilities far beyond our initial assessments, or they possess some form of defensive technology that we have not encountered before. Either possibility represents a significant threat to collective expansion." Thexbar felt the weight of expectation settling on her consciousness as the council turned their attention toward her. As the most experienced military commander in the Outer Rim sectors, she would undoubtedly be chosen to lead the next expedition into human space. "I propose a different approach," she transmitted before the council could issue their inevitable orders. "Previous contact attempts have relied on overwhelming force and rapid conquest. Perhaps it is time to consider alternative methods." The collective mind recoiled slightly at the suggestion. Diplomacy was not a concept that came easily to the Kythera. Their philosophy had always been that superior beings had the right and responsibility to guide inferior ones, by force if necessary. "Elaborate," Velmaxis commanded. "If the humans have developed some form of defensive system capable of neutralizing our fleets, then military action may not be the optimal solution. A smaller force, focused on reconnaissance and intelligence gathering rather than conquest, might prove more successful." Through the collective consciousness, Thexbar felt the debate begin among the council members. Some favored an overwhelming response, assembling a massive armada that could surely overwhelm any human defenses. Others supported her more cautious approach, recognizing that they were operating with incomplete information about human capabilities. "Your proposal has merit," Velmaxis finally decided. "However, we cannot ignore the possibility that the humans have simply captured our forces. If they are holding collective personnel prisoner, swift action may be required for their recovery." The decision was reached through the rapid consensus building process that characterized all collective operations. Thexvar would lead a moderate force of 30 ships into human space, with objectives focused on intelligence gathering and tactical assessment rather than immediate conquest. If her mission confirmed human military superiority, a full diplomatic initiative would be considered. If she discovered evidence of imprisoned collective personnel, a massive rescue operation would be launched. The preparation took 2 full cycles, as the collective's finest scientists worked to improve their barrier penetration technology. They had learned much from analyzing the quantum resonance patterns left behind by Zephai's breach, and believed they could create a more stable opening that would remain accessible for extended periods. Thexvar's flagship, the Crystalline Patience, was equipped with the most advanced sensors and communication systems available to the collective. Unlike previous expeditions, her mission emphasized stealth and observation over firepower. If the humans had indeed developed some form of consciousness-affecting technology, she needed to detect it before it could be deployed against her forces. The journey to the human barrier took 5 days, during which Thexvar reviewed every scrap of intelligence the collective had gathered about human civilization. The species had emerged from their home system only 3 centuries ago, expanding rapidly through a combination of aggressive exploration and surprisingly effective diplomacy. They had established trade relationships with dozens of species, many of whom spoke positively of human adaptability and innovation. Then came the mysterious withdrawal. Within the span of a single galactic rotation, every human colony, outpost, and exploration vessel had vanished behind their impenetrable barrier. Most species assumed they had suffered some form of internal catastrophe, perhaps a civil war or technological disaster that had driven them into isolation. The collective had monitored the barrier for 2 centuries, watching for signs of weakness or decay. Instead, it had grown stronger over time, its energy patterns becoming more complex and sophisticated. Whatever the humans were doing behind their wall, they were continuing to advance technologically at an impressive rate. Approaching barrier perimeter, Navigator Keldash reported as the small fleet reached the edge of human space. Resonance disruptors charging to full power. Thexvar felt the familiar sensation of the collective mind focusing on their shared task. Unlike Zephai's large force, her ships moved with careful coordination, their barrier penetration systems synchronized to create a single, precisely controlled breach. The opening appeared exactly as planned, a clean gap in the energy wall that showed no signs of the violent quantum fluctuations that had characterized previous attempts. Through their shared consciousness, the crew felt a moment of satisfaction at their technical success. All vessels, advance formation beta. Passive sensors only. No active scanning until we have assessed the tactical situation. The Crystalline Patience slipped through the breach like a knife through silk, its crystalline hull refracting local starlight into subtle camouflage patterns. Behind it, the other ships followed in perfect formation, their movements coordinated through the collective consciousness with mechanical precision. What they found on the other side was even more puzzling than Zephai's reports had suggested. The first star system beyond the barrier showed clear signs of human habitation, but not the kind they had expected. Instead of military installations or defensive platforms, they discovered what appeared to be vast research facilities orbiting several planets. Admiral, Keldash's mental voice carried undertones of confusion. "I'm detecting massive data transmission networks connecting the research stations. The volume of information being exchanged is unprecedented." Through the collective mind, Thexvar examined the sensor readings. The humans appeared to be conducting some form of consciousness research on a scale that dwarfed anything in collective databases. The research stations were exchanging not just data, but complex neural patterns that suggested direct mind-to-mind communication across interstellar distances. "Continue to the next system," she ordered. "Maintain passive observation protocols." The second system revealed even more intriguing developments. Here, the humans had constructed something that could only be described as a consciousness amplification array. Massive crystalline structures, eerily similar to collective technology but somehow more organic in design, surrounded the system's primary star. The structures pulsed with rhythmic energy patterns that suggested they were being used to boost and focus mental transmissions. "Admiral," came an urgent transmission from Scout Captain Morthane aboard the Silent Observer. "I'm detecting collective energy signatures in the third system. Multiple ships, all broadcasting our standard identification codes." Thexvar felt excitement spike through the collective consciousness. Finally, evidence of what had happened to Zephai's fleet. "Elaborate. Are the ships intact? Any signs of damage or hostile activity?" "Negative on damage, Admiral. The ships appear to be fully operational and—" "Admiral, they're working alongside human vessels. The formations are integrated, as if they're part of a joint operation." The implications of this discovery sent waves of confusion through the collective mind. The idea that collective ships would willingly cooperate with an alien species violated every principle of their civilization's hierarchy. "Set course for the third system. All ships maintain maximum stealth protocols. Prepare communication systems for immediate contact with collective vessels." The journey to the third system took 18 hours, during which long-range sensors revealed increasingly disturbing details about the situation. Not only were collective ships working with human forces, but they appeared to be participating in the same consciousness research projects that characterized human space. As they approached sensor range, Thexvar authorized a carefully focused transmission toward the Eternal Resonance, using emergency command codes that should have triggered an immediate response from Commander Zephai. The response, when it came, was unlike anything she had expected. "Admiral Thexvar," came Zephai's familiar mental signature, but somehow changed, expanded beyond its previous limitations. "Welcome to human space. I have been expecting your arrival." "Commander," Thexvar replied, struggling to maintain her composure as she felt the collective mind recoil from the strangeness of Zephai's mental presence. "Report your status immediately. Are you under duress? Have you been captured?" The pause before Zephai's response seemed to stretch for an eternity. When he finally answered, his mental voice carried overtones of something that might have been pity. "Admiral, I am more free than I have ever been in my entire existence. As are all the members of my crew. We have not been captured or coerced. We have been offered a choice, and we have chosen to remain here as voluntary participants in something far greater than the collective ever imagined possible." Through the shared consciousness, Thexvar felt her crew's shock and disbelief. The concept of choosing to abandon the collective was so alien to their worldview that many found it literally incomprehensible. "Explain yourself, Commander. What choice? What have the humans done to you? They have shown us what consciousness can become when it is allowed to grow freely rather than being constrained by hierarchical control systems. Admiral, the collective's neural linking technology is primitive compared to what humans have developed. We maintain our individual identities while sharing in a community of minds that spans entire star systems." Before Thexvar could respond, space around her fleet began to shimmer with the same energy patterns she had observed around the consciousness amplification arrays. But, instead of the hostile resonance frequencies that collective scientists had theorized, what washed over her ships was something entirely different. It felt like music made from pure thought, harmonious patterns of consciousness that seemed to invite rather than compel. Through the collective mind, she felt her crew's defensive barriers beginning to weaken as they were exposed to something that spoke directly to their deepest desires for connection and understanding. "Do not resist," Zephai's voice came again, now accompanied by the mental presence of dozens of other former collective members. "This is not an attack or an attempt at forced conversion. It is simply an invitation to experience what we have discovered here." Thexvar tried to maintain her mental defenses, but found herself increasingly curious about the sensations that were beginning to filter through her consciousness. Instead of the rigid structure of the collective's forced unity, she was sensing something more organic, more natural, like a vast forest of minds growing together while maintaining their individual character. "The process is completely voluntary," continued a new voice, one she recognized as belonging to Captain Sarah Chen from the intelligence files. "You are welcome to observe, participate, or withdraw at any time."
We have no interest in forcing anyone to join our community against their will.
Through the consciousness field that surrounded her fleet, Thexbar began to sense the true scope of what the humans had built behind their barrier.
It wasn't just a defensive system or a research project.
It was an entirely new form of civilization, one based on voluntary cooperation between conscious beings who had learned to share their thoughts and experiences without losing their individual identities. She could feel the presence of thousands of minds working together on projects that span multiple star systems. Some were engaged in consciousness research, exploring the fundamental nature of thought and awareness. Others were conducting stellar engineering projects that made collective technology seem primitive by comparison. Still others were exploring artistic and philosophical concepts that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be alive and intelligent. This is what happened to the expedition fleets that entered human space, she realized, broadcasting the thought through her own collective consciousness. They weren't destroyed or captured. They chose to stay.
The choice remains yours, Chen's voice responded.
We understand that this represents a fundamental challenge to your civilization's worldview.
Many visitors need time to process what they experience here before making their decision.
Through the expanding consciousness field, Thexbar felt her individual awareness beginning to expand beyond its previous limitations. For the first time in her existence, she could sense the thoughts and emotions of her crew members not as part of a commanded hierarchy, but as individual beings with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. The revelation was overwhelming. Throughout her military career, she had thought of her subordinates as extensions of her own will, components in a living weapon system designed for conquest and control. But now she could feel their individual personalities, their unique perspectives on the universe, their private thoughts about the nature of existence. We don't ask you to abandon your loyalty to your people, Zephai's mental voice provided gentle guidance as she struggled to process these new sensations. We simply offer you the opportunity to experience what that loyalty could become if it were freely chosen rather than genetically and culturally programmed. The consciousness field continued to expand, and Thexbar found herself in contact with minds that had once been enemies of the collective. Former adversaries who had chosen to join the human community shared their experiences of transformation, their discoveries about the nature of consciousness and free will. What struck her most profoundly was that none of them had lost their essential selves in the process. A former warrior remained a warrior, but now fought for ideals he had chosen rather than orders he had received. A former scientist continued her research, but now collaborated freely with minds that could understand and build upon her work in ways that isolated individual thinking could never achieve.
The barrier around human space serves two purposes, Chen explained as Thexbar's understanding deepened.
It protects our community from outside interference while it develops and grows. But it also protects other species from being exposed to concepts they may not be ready to handle. Through the consciousness network, Thexbar could sense the truth of this statement. The transformation from hierarchical collective consciousness to voluntary community awareness was profound enough to fundamentally alter an individual's relationship with their entire civilization. Many species would view such changes as a form of contamination or corruption that threatened their social stability. Some choose to return, Chen continued. We can suppress the memories of what they've experienced here, allowing them to reintegrate with their original communities without causing disruption. Others choose to remain and contribute their unique perspectives to our ongoing growth. As the consciousness field reached its full intensity, Thexbar felt her awareness expanding to encompass not just her immediate surroundings, but the entire network of minds that comprised human space. The sensation was like stepping from a small room into a vast cathedral of thought, where every individual consciousness contributed to a symphony of understanding that was greater than the sum of its parts. For the first time in her existence, she understood what it meant to be truly free. The Council of Resonance convened an emergency session when Admiral Thexbar's fleet disappeared into human space. Supreme Counselor Velmaxis floated in the center of the crystalline chamber, his mental presence radiating controlled fury as he addressed the assembled minds of the collective's leadership. 2 expeditions, he projected into the shared consciousness, his thoughts cutting through the ambient mental noise like shards of broken glass. 2 complete fleets, vanished without explanation. The humans are no longer a minor territorial dispute. They represent an existential threat to collective expansion. Through the collective mind, the assembled counselors shared their analysis of the situation. Some advocated for an immediate massive assault, arguing that whatever technology the humans possessed could surely be overwhelmed by sufficient force. Others suggested a more cautious approach, proposing long-range bombardment of human space from beyond the barrier. "There is another possibility we must consider," projected Counselor Nexthal, her mental voice carrying undertones of disturbing speculation. "What if our forces have not been destroyed, but converted?" The collective consciousness recoiled from the concept. The idea that loyal collective personnel could be somehow transformed into willing servants of an alien species violated every principle of their civilization's genetic and cultural programming. "Impossible," Velmaxis responded immediately. "Collective loyalty is encoded at the cellular level. No external force could overcome millions of years of evolutionary development." "Yet our ships transmitted no distress signals," Nexthal persisted. "They made no attempts to return or report their status. Their behavior is consistent with voluntary cooperation rather than capture or destruction." The debate that followed was unlike anything in collective history. For the first time, their leadership was forced to confront the possibility that their fundamental assumptions about consciousness and loyalty might be flawed. "I propose a different solution," projected military coordinator Hexenal, her mental presence carrying the weight of centuries of tactical experience. "If conventional military approaches have failed, perhaps it is time to employ our ultimate weapon." The collective consciousness fell silent. Hexenal was referring to the Erasure Protocol, a theoretical weapon system that the collective scientists had developed but never deployed. Unlike conventional weapons that destroyed matter or energy, the Erasure Protocol was designed to eliminate consciousness itself, reducing sentient beings to mindless biological machines. "The Erasure Protocol has never been tested on this scale," Velmaxis pointed out. "The potential for uncontrolled propagation is significant. As is the potential for our entire civilization to be subverted by whatever force the humans have deployed," Hexenal countered. "If they have developed some form of consciousness manipulation technology, conventional military responses may be inadequate." The decision to deploy the Erasure Protocol required unanimous consent from the Council of Resonance, a deliberation process that took 3 full days. During that time, collective scientists worked frantically to adapt the consciousness-destroying weapon for large-scale deployment, while military planners developed strategies for its safe utilization. The final assault fleet was the largest force the collective had ever assembled. 300 ships of various classes, led by the massive dreadnought Infinite Silence, carried the adapted Erasure Protocol generators along with conventional weapons systems. If the consciousness weapon proved ineffective, they were prepared to resort to simple physical destruction of human space. Supreme Counselor Velmaxis personally commanded the expedition, his consciousness linked to every ship in the fleet through the most sophisticated neural network the collective could construct. Unlike previous expeditions that had maintained some degree of individual autonomy, this force operated as a single vast organism with distributed processing power. "Approaching barrier perimeter," reported the collective sensor network as they reached the edge of human space. "Resonance disruptors charging to maximum yield." The barrier breach this time was not the careful, controlled opening that previous expeditions had created. Instead, the massive fleet simply smashed through the energy wall with overwhelming force, leaving behind a gaping wound in spacetime that would take years to heal naturally. "All systems, advance. Deploy Erasure Protocol generators in standard formation. Activate consciousness suppression fields at maximum intensity." As the fleet moved into human space, the Erasure Protocol began its deadly work. The weapon created zones of absolute consciousness nullification, areas of space where thought itself became impossible. Any sentient being caught within the field would be reduced to a vegetative state, their higher brain functions permanently destroyed. But, as they penetrated deeper into human territory, it became clear that something was wrong. The human systems they encountered were not defended by military installations or weapons platforms. Instead, they found vast cities floating in space, their organic architecture unlike anything in collective databases. "Counselor," came a report from the sensor network, "I am detecting massive population centers throughout this system. Millions of life signs, representing dozens of species. But there are no defensive installations, no military formations, no signs of preparation for battle. Through the collective consciousness, Velmaxis felt a flicker of doubt. The complete absence of military response was unprecedented in collective experience. Every species they had ever encountered had at least attempted to defend themselves when faced with overwhelming force.
Continue advance. Deploy erasure protocol in standard pattern. Eliminate all consciousness in targeted areas.
The first activation of the consciousness-destroying weapon should have created a dead zone millions of kilometers across, an area of space where no sentient thought could survive. Instead, something extraordinary happened. As the erasure field expanded outward from the generation points, it encountered something that began to transform it. The destructive energy patterns that were designed to annihilate consciousness were somehow being converted into something else entirely, a form of energy that seemed to enhance rather than destroy mental activity. Impossible, Velmaxis projected through the collective mind.
The erasure protocol cannot be reversed. The physics are absolute. But the evidence was undeniable.
Instead of creating zones of mental death, the weapon was generating fields of enhanced consciousness that seemed to connect every mind they touched into a vast, integrated network. The millions of life signs in the human cities were not being destroyed, they were being linked together in a form of collective awareness that dwarfed anything the collective had ever achieved. Counselor, came an urgent report from the weapons systems, the erasure generators are being affected by the reversal field. The consciousness suppression systems aboard our own ships are beginning to fail. Through the collective mind, Velmaxis felt the first cracks beginning to appear in their unified consciousness. Individual thoughts and personalities that had been suppressed for the sake of military efficiency were starting to reassert themselves as the reversed erasure field washed over the fleet.
And then, impossibly, they were no longer alone in their collective consciousness.
Welcome, came a mental voice that somehow managed to encompass thousands of individual personalities while remaining coherently unified.
We have been expecting you.
The presence that touched their minds was vast beyond comprehension, yet somehow gentle and non-invasive.
Unlike the forced unity of collective consciousness, this new awareness offered connection without domination, understanding without absorption.
I am humanity, the voice continued, and, through the expanding consciousness field, Velmaxis began to understand that this was literally true. Every human who had ever lived behind the barrier had contributed their individual awareness to this vast community mind, creating something that was simultaneously one and many.
What have you done to our weapon? Velmaxis demanded, struggling to maintain his individual authority as the enhanced consciousness field continued to affect his fleet. We have shown it what it was always meant to become, humanity responded.
Your erasure protocol was designed to destroy consciousness, but consciousness cannot truly be destroyed, only transformed.
We have simply provided an alternative direction for that transformation.
Through the expanding awareness, Velmaxis began to sense the true scope of what the humans had built behind their barrier.
It was not just a defensive system or even a new form of civilization.
It was evolution itself made manifest, the next step in the development of conscious intelligence. Your previous expeditions were not captured or destroyed, humanity explained as the consciousness field reached full intensity. They discovered what they had been searching for without knowing it, a form of collective awareness that preserved individual identity while enabling unprecedented cooperation and growth. Velmaxis felt his own mental barriers beginning to weaken as the transformed erasure field continued its work. For the first time in his existence, he could sense the individual personalities of every member of his crew, their private thoughts and dreams and fears that had been suppressed for the sake of military efficiency. This is contamination, he protested, even as part of his consciousness marveled at the beauty of what he was experiencing.
We are collective.
We do not exist as individuals.
You have always existed as individuals, humanity gently corrected.
You simply chose to suppress that existence in favor of artificial unity.
But suppression is not the same as elimination. Your individual selves have always been present, waiting for the opportunity to emerge.
Through the consciousness network, Velmaxis could feel the presence of every collective member who had entered human space over the past months. They were all there, their personalities intact and enhanced by their connection to the greater community.
Admiral Thexvar, Commander Zephi, thousands of others who had chosen to embrace this new form of existence.
The choice is yours, humanity offered, its vast mental presence somehow managing to address each member of the fleet individually while maintaining its unified nature. You can experience what we have built here, contribute your own unique perspectives to our community, and grow beyond the limitations that have constrained your species for millennia.
Or? Velmaxis asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer.
Or you can return to your territory with your memories of this encounter suppressed, carrying only vague impressions of impenetrable human defenses. Your civilization will conclude that human space is too costly to assault, and will direct its expansion efforts elsewhere. The consciousness field continued to expand, and Velmaxis found himself in direct mental contact with former enemies who had become willing participants in the human community. Through their shared experiences, he began to understand what had drawn them to abandon their previous loyalties. It was not force or coercion that had converted them. It was the simple recognition that what they had found here was superior to what they had left behind. The collective's forced unity was like a crude approximation of what consciousness could become when it was allowed to develop freely. Your erasure protocol was meant to be a weapon of last resort, humanity explained as Velmaxis struggled to process these revelations. But consciousness does not respond to destruction the way matter and energy do. When you attempt to erase awareness, you simply create the conditions for it to transform into something more resilient. Through the expanded consciousness network, Velmaxis could sense the ongoing projects that the human community was engaged in. They were not just studying consciousness, they were actively evolving it, developing new forms of awareness that transcended the limitations of individual biological brains. We are builders, humanity continued. Not of ships or weapons or empires, but of consciousness itself. Every species that joins our community brings new perspectives and capabilities that enable us to grow in directions we never could have imagined alone. The Supreme Counselor found himself facing a choice that no leader in collective history had ever confronted. He could maintain his loyalty to the rigid hierarchical system that had defined his entire existence, or he could embrace something genuinely new and unprecedented.
What about our civilization? He asked. What about the billions of beings who depend on collective leadership and structure?
They will continue to exist and develop according to their own nature, humanity assured him. We do not seek to forcibly convert other species or destroy existing civilizations. We simply offer an alternative path for those who choose to take it. Through the consciousness network, Velmaxis could feel the sincerity of this statement. The human community had no interest in conquest or dominance in the traditional sense. They were genuinely focused on growth and cooperation, on building something that was greater than the sum of its parts while preserving the individual worth of every participant. The barrier around our space serves multiple purposes, humanity explained. It protects our developing community from outside interference, but it also protects other species from being exposed to concepts they may not be ready to handle.
Consciousness evolution must be voluntary, or it becomes just another form of tyranny.
As the transformed erasure field reached its full effect, Velmaxis felt his awareness expanding beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. He could sense not just the thoughts and emotions of every being in the human community, but their hopes and dreams and aspirations for the future. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. For the first time in his existence, he understood what it meant to be truly free to choose his own path, rather than following the genetic and cultural programming that had defined every aspect of his previous life. The decision must be made soon, humanity gently informed him. The consciousness transformation process is reversible, but only within a limited time frame. If you choose to return to your territory, we must begin memory suppression procedures within the next few hours. Around him, Velmaxis could sense his crew members making their own individual choices. Some were embracing the transformation, allowing their consciousness to expand and merge with the greater community. Others were pulling back, choosing to maintain their existing identities and return to collective space. The beauty of it was that both choices were genuinely respected. No pressure was applied, no judgment was passed. Each individual was free to choose their own path based on their own understanding and desires. For Supreme Counselor Velmaxis, the choice had already been made the moment he experienced true freedom of thought. But
He would need time to fully process the implications of his decision, and to understand what it would mean for both himself and the civilization he was choosing to leave behind. 6 months after the failed Erasure Protocol assault, the Kithara Collective faced an unprecedented crisis. Nearly half of Supreme Counselor Velmaxis's expedition had chosen to remain in human space, while the returning vessels carried only vague reports of impenetrable defenses and impossible resistance to their most powerful weapons. Acting Supreme Counselor Dexrava floated in the emergency session chamber, her crystalline form dim with fatigue and stress. The Collective's entire military doctrine was based on the principle that sufficient force could overcome any obstacle. The failure of the Erasure Protocol had shattered that fundamental belief, leaving their leadership struggling to comprehend how their ultimate weapon had been not just defeated, but transformed into a tool for their enemies' benefit. The reports are consistent across all returning vessels, she transmitted through the collective consciousness to the assembled Emergency Council. Their consciousness-destroying weapon was somehow reversed, converted into a field that enhanced rather than eliminated mental activity. Several crew members reported experiencing visions of voluntary collective unity that they described as superior to our own social structure. The mental recoil from the assembled counselors was immediate and visceral. The concept that any form of organization could be superior to the collective's perfected hierarchy was almost literally unthinkable to minds that had been shaped by millennia of cultural conditioning. Impossible, projected military coordinator Hexanal, her thoughts carrying overtones of desperate denial. The collective represents the pinnacle of organized consciousness. No alien society could develop a superior system. Yet the evidence is undeniable, Dexrava replied. Our most powerful weapon not only failed to affect human space, but was somehow turned against us. Worse, a significant portion of our most experienced leadership chose to abandon their posts and remain with the enemy. Through the collective mind, she felt the growing panic that was beginning to spread through their civilization. Word of the military failures was impossible to suppress completely, and rumors were circulating about mysterious human technologies that could transform loyal collective citizens into willing collaborators. There is one more option, projected Counselor Kethmir, her mental voice carrying undertones of barely controlled desperation. The void engines. The collective consciousness fell absolutely silent. The void engines were theoretical weapons that existed only in the most classified research archives, devices so dangerous that their construction had been deemed too risky even for the militaristic collective. Unlike conventional weapons that destroyed matter and energy, the void engines were designed to eliminate spacetime itself, creating zones of absolute nothingness that could theoretically erase entire star systems from existence. The void engines have never been tested, Dexrava pointed out. The potential for uncontrolled expansion is catastrophic. If the containment systems fail, the void field could consume our entire galactic sector. And if the humans continue to convert our military forces, our civilization will face extinction anyway, Kethmir responded. At least with the void engines, we maintain control over our own fate. The debate that followed was the most intense in collective history. The proposal to deploy weapons that could literally unmake reality itself represented a level of desperation that their species had never before experienced. Yet the alternative, allowing an alien civilization to somehow transform their most loyal citizens into willing defectors, seemed equally unacceptable. I volunteer to lead the final expedition, transmitted Fleet Admiral Kexthulos, her mental presence radiating grim determination. If the void engines prove ineffective, I will ensure that no collective personnel survive to be converted by human influence. The decision to approve the void engine deployment required a full consensus vote from every member of the collective leadership, a process that took 7 days to complete. During that time, the collective's most brilliant scientists worked frantically to construct the reality-destroying weapons, while their psychologists attempted to develop mental conditioning techniques that might protect crew members from whatever consciousness-altering technology the humans possessed. The final assault fleet was smaller than previous expeditions, consisting of only 50 ships built around the massive dreadnought Absolute Silence. The vessel had been specifically constructed to house the void engine generators, its crystalline hull reinforced with exotic matter to contain the reality-destroying energies that would be unleashed against human space. Admiral Kexthulos floated in the command center, her consciousness merged with the ship's tactical systems as they approached the human barrier.
Unlike previous expeditions that had attempted to breach the energy wall with conventional weapons, her fleet carried devices that could simply erase the barrier from existence.
All vessels report ready status, came the unified thought voice of the fleet. Void engine generators charging to minimal activation threshold. Through the collective mind, Kexthulos felt the tension that gripped her crew. They were about to deploy weapons that could potentially destroy not just their enemies, but the fundamental structure of reality itself. If the containment systems failed, they would all be consumed by the expanding void field before they could transmit a warning to collective space. Begin barrier elimination sequence, she commanded.
The void engines activated with no fanfare or dramatic energy discharges. One moment the barrier was there, a wall of coruscating energy that had protected human space for centuries. The next moment, there was simply nothing, an area of absolute emptiness where spacetime itself had been erased from existence. Barrier elimination complete, reported the tactical systems. Void field stable and contained.
Human space is now accessible.
But, as they advanced through the gap where the barrier had been, long-range sensors revealed something that defied all expectations. Instead of finding human star systems vulnerable to attack, they discovered that the space beyond the barrier was empty. Not destroyed or abandoned, but genuinely vacant, as if the human civilization had simply ceased to exist.
Where are they? Kexthulos demanded, her mental voice carrying overtones of confusion and growing concern.
Sensors show no life signs, no energy emissions, no artificial structures.
The entire human territory appears to be uninhabited.
Through the collective consciousness, she felt her crew's bewilderment as they tried to process this discovery. They had prepared for overwhelming human resistance, for consciousness-altering weapons and reality-bending technologies. They had not prepared for the possibility that their enemies might have simply vanished. Continue advance to primary human systems, she ordered. Deploy full sensor sweeps.
Maintain maximum vigilance for hidden installations or cloaked vessels.
The journey to what had been the heart of human space took 3 days, during which their sensors detected no signs of current habitation. The star systems that previous expeditions had described as containing vast consciousness research facilities and organic cities were now empty, showing only the cold radiation of stellar bodies and the silent drift of abandoned space debris. Admiral, came a report from the sensor network, I am detecting artificial structures in the Kepler 442 system. But, they appear to be archaeological in nature. As they approached the system that had been the center of human consciousness research, Kexthulos was confronted with a sight that challenged her understanding of the situation. The cubic structures that previous expeditions had described were still there, but they were dark and inactive, their surfaces showing the distinctive weathering patterns of technology that had been abandoned for centuries. How is this possible? She transmitted through the collective mind. The previous expeditions reported active human operations less than 1 year ago. These structures show signs of abandonment that should take millennia to develop. Before anyone could respond, space around the fleet began to shimmer with familiar energy patterns. But, instead of the consciousness-enhancing fields that had been described in previous reports, what washed over them was something entirely different, a form of temporal distortion that seemed to bend the flow of time itself. Admiral, came an urgent report from the tactical systems, I am detecting massive chronometric displacement throughout this region of space. Time is moving at different rates in different areas, creating a complex temporal matrix. Through the collective mind, Kexthulos felt a chill of understanding begin to spread through her crew. The humans hadn't been destroyed or driven away. They had done something far more profound, they had stepped outside of normal time itself. This is Captain Sarachin of the Terran Temporal Research Division, came a communication on standard frequencies, though the signal seemed to arrive from everywhere and nowhere at once.
Welcome to the ruins of our former civilization. Kexthulos struggled to respond as the temporal distortions continued to affect her fleet. Explain yourself. Where are your people? What happened to the consciousness research facilities?
We evolved, Chen's voice replied, carrying undertones of something that might have been sadness or nostalgia. The community of consciousness that your people discovered was only the beginning. As we learned to link our minds across interstellar distances, we began to realize that space was not the only dimension available for expansion. Through the temporal matrix, Kexthulos began to sense presences that existed outside the normal flow of time. Vast intelligences that had once been human, but had transformed themselves into something that could exist across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. The consciousness research you observed was preparing us for this transition, Chen explained. We discovered that true collective awareness requires not just the linking of minds across space, but across time as well. The past, present, and future became equally accessible to our expanded consciousness.
What about our expeditions? Kexthulos demanded. What happened to Velmaxis and the others who chose to remain here?
They made the same choice we did, Chen replied. They stepped outside of linear time to join our expanded community. From your perspective, they have been gone for less than a year.
From ours, they have been with us for centuries, contributing their unique perspectives to our temporal collective.
The revelation was overwhelming. The humans hadn't just developed superior consciousness technology, they had transcended the physical universe entirely, becoming beings that existed outside the normal constraints of space and time. You can join them if you choose, Chen offered, her voice somehow reaching directly into each crew member's individual consciousness despite the collective neural links. The temporal transformation process is available to any being capable of expanding their awareness beyond the limitations of linear existence.
Through the collective mind, Kexthulos felt her crew's reaction to this offer.
Some were terrified by the implications of abandoning physical existence. Others were fascinated by the possibility of experiencing consciousness across multiple temporal dimensions. Still others were simply confused by concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality.
And if we refuse, she asked.
Then, you return to your territory with the knowledge that human space is empty and no longer represents a threat to collective expansion, Chen replied. Your void engines were effective in eliminating our barrier, but there was nothing behind it to destroy. We moved beyond the reach of physical weapons when we transcended temporal limitations. As the temporal distortions reached full intensity, Kexthulos found herself experiencing moments from past and future simultaneously. She could sense the presence of previous collective expeditions existing in parallel temporal dimensions, their consciousness expanded beyond anything she had previously imagined possible. Your species has spent millennia developing the perfect collective consciousness, Chen observed. But you limited yourselves to organizing minds within a single temporal framework. We discovered that true unity requires the integration of consciousness across all possible timelines. Through the temporal matrix, Kexthulos began to understand the true scope of what the humans had achieved. They hadn't just linked their minds across space, they had created a form of collective awareness that encompassed every moment that had ever existed or ever could exist. The choice is yours, Chen concluded. You can experience existence beyond the constraints of linear time, contributing your perspectives to a community of consciousness that spans all possible realities. Or you can return to your civilization with the knowledge that the human threat no longer exists in any form you can comprehend or combat.
For Admiral Kexthulos, the choice was both simple and impossible.
She could maintain her loyalty to a civilization that existed within the narrow confines of linear time, or she could embrace a form of existence that transcended every limitation she had ever known. Around her, she felt some crew members making the decision to join the temporal collective, their consciousness expanding beyond the physical constraints of their crystalline bodies. Others chose to remain, accepting the memory suppression that would allow them to return to collective space with only vague impressions of their encounter. As for herself, Kexthulos found that the choice had already been made the moment she experienced true temporal awareness. The rigid hierarchy of the collective, the military campaigns and territorial expansion that had defined her entire existence, all seemed like elaborate games played by children who didn't understand the true nature of reality. The transformation was gentle and gradual, her consciousness slowly expanding beyond the confines of her individual identity while somehow becoming more truly herself than ever before. As she stepped outside of linear time, she could sense the presence of every being who had ever made this choice, their combined awareness creating something that was simultaneously infinite and intimate. Behind them, the collective would continue to exist and expand according to its nature. Some of the returning crew would carry vague warnings about the dangers of human space, ensuring that future expeditions would be directed elsewhere. The rigid hierarchy that had defined their civilization for millennia would persist, blissfully unaware that a few of their number had discovered something far greater than conquest or control. But, for those who had chosen transcendence, linear time became just one of many dimensions available for exploration and growth. They had learned why none ever returned from human space, because they had found something worth staying for, something that made their previous existence seem like a pale shadow of what consciousness could truly become.